So this HOA president actually kicks down my cabin door proper while I am having a lager with the kingdom's legal professional preferred. She just committed 6 felonies in front of the only man or woman in America who could throw her ass in jail. I am speaking full on wooden splintering, fashion designer heels clicking on damaged glass, the complete 9 yards. This woman in her 1000 blazer, reeking of that aggressive fragrance that likely expenses greater than my truck price, storms into my grandfather's cabin, screaming about violations and jurisdiction like she owns the region. Zero clue who she just barged in on. Zero clue she stays streaming her personal arrest warrant to 3,000 fans. 6 months earlier, idea Karen turned into simply your common electricity under the influence of alcohol neighbor. Turns out she became walking off her $1 million embezzlement scheme, and I used to be about to by chance burn her entire crook empire to the ground. What would you do if a few HHHOA psychopath invaded your non-public belongings all through the maximum vital meeting of your existence? Drop a comment beneath and tell me wherein you're looking from. I guarantee half of you have got handled these community dictators before. Permit me back up and inform you how this whole nightmare commenced. 6 months in the past, existence was quite damn good. My call is Marcus Henley. I'm 52, and after 30 years of crawling through muddy trenches, installing energy grids throughout 3 counties, I might finally earn my retirement. The crown jewel, my grandfather's fishing cabin on Clean Water Lake, 2 acres of pure heaven that old Pop offered back in 1963 for $800. Can you accept as true with that? $800 for lakefront property, it really is now worth greater than the majority's houses. This wasn't a few fancy McMansion thoughts, you. We're speak me hand-honeyed logs, a stone fireplace that Pop built together with his personal calloused palms and a screened porch that creaked in all the right places. I might stored it completely off-grid with the aid of choice, solar panels buzzing quietly on the roof, well water that tasted like childhood recollections, and a septic device that definitely labored higher than Maximum City's setups. The morning mist rising off the lake each day reminded me why Pop selected this spot. He used to say, "The land picks you," now not the alternative way around. Smart man, he extensively utilized to say, "Marcus, while someone needs your land real awful, find out why is it's commonly well worth extra than they are telling you." Then she showed up. Delilah Cromwell, although all people simply known as her that HOA Psycho, rolled into our peaceful lake network like a tornado in fashion designer garb. 58 years old, fresh from a few California subdivision in which seemingly being neighborhood dictator turned into a complete time career. She drove this pearl-white Escalade with arrogance plates that read Rule 1. A youngster you no longer, and wore her HOA president badge on her blazer adore it become a sheriff's big name. The woman had one mission in lifestyles: transform our rustic lakefront into what she referred to as an upscale motel network. However, right here's what I failed to realize then. 3 aged couples had already sold their cabins to involved consumers inside 2 months of her arrival. Humorous coincidence. Proper? Her first act of conflict got here on a Tuesday morning. I'm sitting on Pop's porch consuming coffee and watching a pair of loons teach their infants to dive once I listen these sharp clicking sounds on my timber dock, dressmaker heels. 7 a.m. on my personal belongings. 10 minutes later, she's taping this respectable searching notice to my display screen door. Violation citation. Ugly dock structure, detrimental community belongings values. Excellent. $500. Compliance required inside 72 hours or day-by-day penalties will accrue. I had to examine it twice. My weathered dock, the same one Pop and I had strengthened together when I used to be 12, changed into seemingly an eyesore threatening the whole neighborhoods. Real property market. Being a reasonable man, I walked over to give an explanation for that my belongings definitely predates the HOA via approximately 40 years. You recognize what she stated to me status there in my very own driveway, palms on her hips, like she owned the vicinity. Everyone in this lake solutions to me, sweetie. Ask the Hendersons how properly combating me labored out for them. The Hendersons, my elderly pals who'd mysteriously decided to downsize Ultimate Month after residing right here for 23 years. The portions were not clicking, but something cold settled in my stomach. That is whilst she began her pictures consultation, circling my cabin like a real property appraiser, snapping photographs of my solar panels, my vegetable garden, even my grandfather's hand-carved porch railings. Yeah. The scent of her chemical air freshener wafting from that idling Escalade made me need to gag. Via the give-up of the week, I had 3 more citations. Everyone came with escalating fines. Each one made it crystal clear that Delilah Cromwell had declared battle on everything my own family had constructed in this land. I figured I was dealing with your normal strength-tripping neighbor. Demanding, sure, but potential. What I didn't realize became that I just painted a goal on my again in a recreation, an awful lot larger and greater risky than petty HOA than petty house politics. Pop's words echoed in my head. Discover why they want your land. I was approximately to find out why, and it might alternate the entirety. Karen did not waste time escalating to the huge weapons. 3 days after my compliance cutoff date exceeded, because critically, I wasn't tearing down Pop's dock for a few wannabe dictator, a certified letter arrived that made my coffee flavor like ash. Quit and desist. Violation of community waterway rules. The letter had examined Blackstone, Mayer, and Friends. One of these fancy law firms where the companions probably rate more in keeping with our than I made in a month. The legal gibberish essentially stated my dock was illegally extending into network waterway and that I owed $3,000 in retroactive violation fees. Plus, they had been threatening to slap a lien on my assets if I failed to pay up within 10 days. My first intuition became panic. Those people had attorneys. I had a toolbox and a terrible mindset. However, then I remembered something Pop usually droomed into me during those long fishing afternoons. Marcus, whilst someone's looking to felony communicate you out of your land, the actual reality is usually inside the county data. In no way consider what they let you know. Move find the real papers. So I drove all the way down to the county courthouse, that musty basement wherein all the important stuff gets buried underneath many years of bureaucratic dust. The clerk, a candy female named Betty, who remembered Pop from his fishing event days, helped me pull the unique property surveys. I would learn this trick from my union days. Continually take a look at the source files earlier than a few fit attempts to buffalo you with fancy letterhead. What I found made my blood boil. My grandfather's lot failed to just visit the water's edge. It covered 50 feet into the lake. The deed stamped and legit from 1963 become crystal clean. That dock wasn't trespassing on network property. It becomes sitting smack dab inside the middle of my lake. However, here's the real kicker. The HOA wasn't established till 1998, 35 years after Pop bought his land. I remembered my antique foreman always announcing that older houses often have rights that more recent traits cannot touch. Something about grandfathered exemptions that trump any neighborhood association nonsense. Armed with copies of the entirety, I marched back to my cabin feeling pretty damn pleased with myself. That pride lasted exactly till I tried to leave for groceries and determined Karen's Escalade parked sideways throughout my driveway. No longer beside it, now not near it. Immediately blocking off it like she turned into conducting a few form of one-woman site visitor's stop. When I knocked on her window, she rolled it down just enough to talk through the space. Oh, Marcus, I am just reviewing the network parking policies. This might take a while. The mechanical hum of her idling engine blended with that sickly candy air freshener created this surreal bubble of passive competitive insanity. Here I was, a grown man who'd constructed one too, the county's electric infrastructure, being held hostage in my own driveway by a suburban football mom with an energy complicated. But Karen turned into just getting warmed up. Within per week, she'd prepared something referred to as the Lakeside Beautification Committee, which sounds pleasant until you recognize it became essentially a success squad targeting every person who failed to in-shape her us of a club vision. Suddenly, associates who'd waved at me for years have been crossing the road to keep away from my contact. Her FB posts have been masterpieces of passive competitive conflict involved approximately eyesore houses affecting all our domestic values. Some humans just do not care approximately the network Hatch Lakeside Strong Hashbot assets values. The remarks section become a feeding frenzy frenzy. People I would acknowledge for decades have been all of a sudden professionals on belongings regulation, parroting Karen's speak-me factors like she was some type of actual estate earnings. The three of my acquaintances truly apologized to me privately. Tom and Susan Martinez pulled me aside for the duration of my nighttime walk and confessed that Karen had strongly counseled they bitch approximately my belongings or face their personal quotation, blitz. Reputedly, she'd already focused vintage Mr. Peterson for having non-regulation window containers and threatened the young couple with the infant over their ugly playground system. She's given something on absolutely everyone, Tom whispered, glancing round like Karen might be hiding in the trees with a digital camera. Her husband works up on the country capitol, related, you understand, political stuff. That hit me like a chilly slap. This wasn't simply community drama anymore. This girl had reached beyond our little lake community. That night time, I found orange spray paint protecting my mailbox. Shiny competitive strokes that spelled out comply or leave. My safety digicam, sun-powered and hidden in the back of a pine tree, caught everything, such as Karen's license plate as she drove away at 2:30 a.m. When I referred to as the sheriff's office the subsequent morning, bet who showed up. Deputy Chad Cromwell, Karen's nephew. He took one study the vandalism report, shrugged and stated, probable simply youngsters. You know how they may be. The tough texture of that spray paint under my hands as I tried to scrub it off felt like sandpaper towards my soul. Pop used to mention, now and again you need larger guns for a larger combat. Time to locate a few larger weapons. Karen's next move came disguised as civic obligation, which somehow made it even greater infuriating. She'd figured out that direct war of words wasn't working. So, she determined to weaponize the complete county forms against me. It commenced with a well-mannered knock on my door from Building Inspector Dale Morrison, a man I would honestly labored with on several projects over the years. The awkward look on his face instructed me the whole thing I had to understand before he even opened his mouth. Marcus, I am sorry approximately this. However, I got a grievance about unpermitted systems on your house. You understand I have to comply with up on these items. 3 hours later, Dale had crawled through each inch of my cabin together with his clipboard and measuring tape. His end, everything changed in a not handiest as much as code, but surely past cutting-edge safety standards. Pop might have been vintage faculty, however he'd constructed matters to ultimate. Whoever filed this complaint, Dale muttered as he packed up his tools. He either would not recognize what they're speak me approximately, or they're simply seeking to waste anyone's time. Day after today delivered Environmental Officer Janet Bennett investigating reviews of my septic system, contaminating the lake atmosphere. Once more, perfectly functioning. Better than most new installations, she admitted. Then, Hearth Marshal Bob Rodriguez confirmed up to observe my solar panels for hazardous electric violations. Clean invoice of fitness there, too. Each inspection value me a day of peace and a piece of my retirement sanity. However, extra importantly, every fake record become growing in legit paper trail that made me seem like some kind of trouble assets proprietor. I remembered something my union rep used to warn us, approximately. Whole bureaucratic harassment become a traditional tactic as it regarded legitimate on paper, even when it become natural malicious while I used to be coping with the inspection parade. Karen turned into busy gambling her media game. She'd managed to get herself interviewed by way of Channel 7's Community Spotlight section, positioning herself as this concerned citizen combating to protect our circle of relatives, friendly lake surroundings. She showed carefully angled pics that made my cabin appear to be some kind of backwoods shack, pointed out dangerous conditions threatening kids' protection, and painted herself as a brave advised standing up in opposition to irresponsible property owners. What absolutely were given my blood boiling turned into watching her stand on my dock, the one she claimed turned into illegally trespassing, even as she introduced her worried citizen performance for the cameras. The crisp sound of my cell phone buzzing with angry texts from pals who'd seen the tale felt like gadget gun fireplace. One to the lake community now idea I was a few form of environmental risk. But here's where Karen made her first real mistake. She were given greedy. My old pal Jake Martinez from the Electricians Union called me up after seeing the news story. Marcus, that lady's full of, and everybody knows it. You built Bond too, the smooth energy infrastructure in this county. Your son's setup is the one I exploit, for instance, whilst I am training apprentices. Inside 2 days, Jake had prepared a parade of my former co-workers to force by and inspect my belongings. Seems having 20 grasp electricians publicly vouch to your paintings tends to shut down the hazardous installation narrative pretty brief. This is whilst things started out getting interesting. My legal professional pal Chuck Davis, we would long passed a high school collectively, stopped by means of for a logger, and noted something that made my ears perk up. You recognize Marcus. The lawyer well-known's office has been investigating HOA corruption instances throughout the nation. Several groups reporting similar harassment styles to what you are describing. What form of styles? I asked, although I used to be pretty sure I already knew the solution. Aged homeowners getting hit with frivolous citations, property values artificially pushed down, mysterious consumers swooping in with coins gives. Ring any bells? It rang each rattling bell I had. Chuck explained that these schemes generally worried a person with political connections presenting cowl, whilst the harassment marketing campaign drove out longtime residents. The properties could then get flipped to builders for huge profits. The egg office is looking for witnesses. It's looking for witnesses, Chuck endured. People who have documented the harassment and might show the pattern. A person like you might be precisely what they need. The mechanical hum of my fridge regarded unnaturally loud as that data sank in. Karen wasn't only a few electricity-inebriated neighbor. She was probably part of something tons bigger and extra systematic. That night, he became the Democratic birthday party treasurer, a function that gave him get entry to improvement plans, zoning modifications, and political favors throughout multiple counties. My smell of fresh espresso mixing with morning lake air usually calmed me down. However, now it simply reminded me how plenty I had to lose. This wasn't approximately HOA expenses anymore. This became approximately whether I'd be the following sufferer in someone else's get-rich-quick scheme. Karen's subsequent segment made the whole thing that got here earlier than seem like a friendly confrontation. She'd reputedly determined that bureaucratic harassment wasn't transferring speedy sufficient, so she switched to full-scale individual assassination. Started with a FB post that made my belly drop. Urgent protection worries approximately aggressive behavior from lakefront resident. Please keep your kids far away from the Jap Shore region. Can be filing for protecting measures. Hatch Lakeside Safety Nash Guard our youngsters. Competitive behavior. Me, the man who helped arrange the yearly kids fishing derby for 15 years walking. Within hours, that post had been shared 43 instances. Feedback section changed into a digital lynch mob of individuals who'd never even met me. All convinced I was some sort of risky lunatic based totally on Karen's cautiously crafted sufferer narrative. I always concept something was off approximately that man. Heard he threatened an HOA board member. Thank God we've got courageous humans like Delilah searching out for us. The surely unwell element. Half these comments got here from profiles with generic stock pictures. Kind of faux money owed that political operatives used to amplify their messaging. Karen wasn't simply spreading lies. She became orchestrating a professional smear marketing campaign. 2 days later, she filed for a restraining order. Petition, which became public record, painted me as an unstable character making verbal threats against network leaders. Entire fabrication. However, it failed to depend. The submitting by myself became evidence that I was dangerous. Here's Patricia Reyes, who actually knew my circle of relatives from way lower back, took one examine Karen's proof and brushed off the request for loss of credible documentation. However, the harm was performed. Now, there has been an official court record with my call and the word threats on it. The emotional toll changed into starting to get to me. I'd sit on Pop's porch within the evenings, nursing a logger and questioning whether this fight become well worth destroying the peaceful retirement I might labored 30 years to earn. The weight of his leather-based recliner felt exceptional now, much less like comfort, greater like the obligation of wearing him a legacy that a person turned into systematically seeking to erase. However, simply while I was beginning to recall throwing in the towel, something lovely passed off. Community began combating back. Decide Hendrum wasn't the best one that remembered my circle of relatives. Retired Decide William Invoice Carter, who used to fish with Pop Lower back in the 70s, confirmed up at my door with a thermos of coffee and a few unsolicited felony advice. Marcus, that female's gambling a recreation your grandfather might have seen right via. She's counting on you feeling isolated and overwhelmed. Don't supply her that satisfaction. Invoice explained that documented harassment campaigns like this generally indicated larger crook activity. Humans don't visit this a whole lot problem over petty neighborhood disputes. Money involved right here. Huge money. The neighborhood VFW Post, where I'd been a member for 20 years, issued an assertion calling Karen's accusations baseless attacks on a decorated community member. The Ancient Society chimed in, highlighting my cabin's cultural significance as one of the last authentic structures at the lake. Even the environmental institution that monitored lake water satisfactory praised my sustainable living model. It felt just like the complete decent a part of our community changed into rallying around me. The bitter taste of pressure was finally giving way to something that felt like desire. But Karen wasn't accomplished. No, not even close. Her subsequent past turned into diabolical in its simplicity. She some way satisfied the software organization to research irregularities in my electrical provider. For 3 days, I had no power while they reviewed my solar grid connection for protection violations. Then came the fake police reports. Suspicious pastime at my cabin during huge daytime. Loud noises suggesting potential domestic disturbance while I was sincerely alone. Feasible drug interest primarily based at the uncommon quantity of site visitors. Site visitors who became out to be union buddies preventing by means of to expose aid. Each name brought sheriff's deputies to my door. Every goat created some other incident file. Each file brought to the growing file that made me appear to be a complex resident. The most infuriating element turned into that Deputy Chad Cromwell, changed into normally the responding officer. He'd show up, ask a few pre-functor questions, and depart with this smirk that stated he knew precisely what his aunt become doing. Throughout one especially surreal visit, he in reality had the balls to mention, "You know, Mr. Henley, in case you simply apologized to my aunt and taken your own home into compliance, these kind of problems would possibly go away. This is once I found out this wasn't pretty much me anymore." Karen was showing other property owners what occurred while you didn't bend the knee. The Andersons, the elderly couple who'd mysteriously determined to promote, possibly went via this precise same nightmare. The electronic ping of my smartphone have become a source of anxiety in place of connection. Every notification will be any other neighbor turning towards me. Another fake file. Some other twist in Karen's psychological war campaign. However, it additionally added messages of help from people I would forgotten even knew me. The combat changed into some distance from over, but I used to be sooner or later know how the regulations of the sport. The breakthrough came when I used to be doing the maximum uninteresting component imaginable, organizing office work for my assembly with the lawyer standards office. Chuck had arranged the entirety, explaining that they needed exact documentation for their statewide HOA corruption investigation. I used to be sitting at Pop's Antique All-Writable, surrounded by using stacks of citations, inspection reports, and felony threats when something struck my eye. One in every of Karen's violation notices had this tiny footer I would in no way paid interest to earlier than. Fines payable to Lakeside Estates' Network Development Fund, account number 847,291. Community Improvement Fund. That sounded reputable enough, but something about it nagged at me. Perhaps it became 30 years of reading electrical contracts and spotting the satisfactory print that contractors use to screw over owners. However, I determined to dig deeper, too. The county clerk's workplace had come to be my second home by way of this factor, so Betty knew precisely what I was searching out once I asked about HOA economic records. She pulled up the general public filings and spread them throughout the counter like she was dealing cards. "Right here's the element, Marcus," she stated, adjusting her analyzing glasses. Homeowner institutions have to record annual reports just like every other organization. Permit me show you what I discovered. The numbers failed to upload up the Etherbeer, not even close. Over the past 2 years, the HOA had gathered $280,000 in emergency tests for lake dock maintenance that had been never completed. Every other $150 had supposedly gone to expert landscaping offerings furnished via Cromwell Grounds and Protection, which according to Country Enterprise data had become owned by using Karen's brother-in-law. However, here's the kicker. The landscaping organization had been integrated exactly 3 weeks after Karen became HOA president. I remembered Pop's recommendation approximately following the cash trail. The coverage claims were even more blatant. The HOA had filed for hurricane harm reimbursement 3 times inside the beyond 18 months. Trouble changed into, I might live through each hurricane in this lake, and none of them had induced the form of damage that could justify $950 in coverage payouts. Betty helped me pass reference the insurance claims with real weather reports from the National Weather Provider. The dates didn't healthy up. The HOA become claiming typhoon damage on days when the climate had been perfectly clear. Marcus, Betty whispered, even though we were on my own inside the statistics room. This seems like fraud. Undeniable and simple fraud. My fingers had been really shaking as I photocopied the entirety. The smooth sense of these document pages felt like holding evidence that could trade the entirety. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was prepared robbery from the entire lake community. The belongings control fees were the final piece of the puzzle. The HOA turned into paying $5,000 monthly to something called the Clearwater Belongings Answers for Administrative Services. However, when I regarded up the enterprise registration, the indexed address became a PO. Container in the same postal district where Karen lived. The whole thing clicked into location like tumblers in a lock. Karen's harassment marketing campaign wasn't just about electricity or non-public spite. She became systematically writing down property values to enable an improvement scheme whilst concurrently embezzling from the community fund. The aged couples who'd sold their cabins hadn't just been stressed into leaving. They had been pressured to promote it underneath market expenses because Karen's artificial assets price worries had scared off legitimate customers. Those mysterious cash shoppers were likely connected to the same improvement organization that turned into benefiting from the embezzled funds. No. I idea approximately the Hendersons, in all likelihood counting their pennies in a few cramped rental, never understanding they'd been robbed twice. As soon as once they bought their dream home for peanuts, and again through the prices that they had paid into Karen's slush fund. The flavor of black espresso had in no way been so bitter. This wasn't just about my cabin anymore. Karen had been stealing from everybody, which includes the buddies she'd convinced to turn in opposition to me. Pop continually said that whilst you find corruption, it's commonly larger than you suspect. He became right. Karen wasn't just strolling in HOA. She was walking a crook agency. And I used to be approximately at hand the evidence to the one individual inside the country who should shut it down completely. That nighttime, I transformed Pop's back bedroom into something that appeared like a police research unit. Maps of the lake belongings spread across the partitions, showing original boundaries as opposed to modern HOA claims. Timeline charts tracking Karen's harassment marketing campaign alongside suspicious financial transactions. Pics, recordings, and documents prepared by means of potential crook expenses. I felt like one of these television detectives, besides in preference to looking serial killers. I used to be searching suburban embezzlers. The lawyer preferred's office had assigned prosecutors to my case, Sarah Mitchell and David Bennett, who arrived the next morning searching like they intended enterprise. Sarah became this sharpied woman in her 40s who reminded me of the safety inspectors who used to hold us honest on activity websites. David changed into more youthful, maybe early 30s, but he had this quiet intensity that counseled he'd already dispatched lots of white-collar criminals to jail. Mr. Henley, Sarah stated, spreading the economic documents throughout Pop's dining table. What you've got exposed here goes manner beyond simple HOA harassment. That is systematic fraud that would impact dozens of households. David pulled out a tablet and started out connecting dots I hadn't even seen. We've been investigating comparable schemes in 4 other counties. The pattern is constantly the same. The politically related individuals use HOA positions to manipulate belongings values at the same time as embezzling community finances. This is when they instructed me, approximately the FBI involvement. Agent Rebecca Torres from the White Collar Crime Unit had been monitoring development fraud across the location. Reputedly, my documentation became the lacking piece that might tie collectively more than one ongoing investigations. The beauty of economic crimes, Agent Torres explained during our video call, is that the entirety leaves a paper trail. Your HOA information showed traditional money laundering, faux invoices, shell corporations, coverage fraud. But we want greater than just documents. We want witnesses and recorded proof of ongoing criminal pastime. Chuck, my lawyer pal, had been working backstage too. He'd linked with 17 different lakefront families who'd skilled terrible harassment. Whilst we amassed them on the VFW corridor, their stories painted a photo that made my blood boil. The Thompsons had paid $8,000 in bogus violation fines earlier than selling their cabin. The Garkas have been hit with emergency exams totaling $12,000 for lake enhancements that by no means materialized. Antique Mrs. Patterson were so intimidated through Karen's felony threats that she'd moved in with her daughter in Florida, leaving behind the house in which she'd lived for 43 years. Each story followed the equal playbook. Escalating harassment, manufactured violations, pressure to promote, and each family had contributed to that network development fund that became virtually just Karen's private piggy financial institution. Here's what the majority don't apprehend about HOA fraud. Defined retired accountant Frank Weber, who'd volunteered to assist examine the monetary records. Property owner associations are required to report Shape 1120 tax returns annually if they meet sure profits thresholds. Legitimate businesses report religiously. Corrupt ones commonly don't due to the fact honest accounting might expose their theft. Frank had observed that our HOA hadn't filed proper tax returns in over 2 years, no matter gathering hundreds in costs and assessments. That single truth ought to cause federal tax evasion prices on top of everything else. The technical strategy consultation felt like planning an army operation. We had monetary proof, witness testimony, recorded harassment, and documented fraud. However, Agent Torres desired something larger. She wanted to capture Karen in the act of actively committing crimes. The first-class way to build an hermetic case, she explained, is to create a scenario in which the suspect's crook behavior is captured by using regulation enforcement in real time. We want her to incriminate herself on digital camera. That is, whilst Chuck advised the proper setup. The attorney Trendy has been seeking out impossibility to announce new HOA reform law. What if she held that assertion at Marcus' cabin? It is symbolically perfect, protective property owner rights in the genuine place in which those rights have been violated. Sarah's eyes lit up. And if Karen's pattern holds, she'll virtually try to disrupt any suspicious activity at Marcus' belongings. Her want to control the scenario will override her commonplace experience. We spent the following week getting ready for what Agent Torres known as a managed confrontation state of affairs. Expert recording gadget hidden in the course of my cabin. Undercover officers located across the lake. A couple of regulation enforcement organizations coordinated for fast reaction. The community coalition had grown too. Nearby media became alerted to potential breaking news. Social media campaigns have been geared up to counter any fake narratives Karen would possibly try and spin. Assist networks were activated for the post-confrontation period. My old union schooling kicked in. Whilst you're planning a complex job, you put together for every feasible state of affairs and continually have backup structures. We had backup plans for the backup plans for the backup plans. The entice was set. Karen's pattern of conduct becomes so predictable that we ought to nearly script her next pass. All we had to do became await her to kick down the door. Actually, Karen must have sensed the partition's ultimate end due to the fact her conduct went from calculated harassment to full-blown sabotage. It turned into like watching a cornered animal lash out in every direction, getting greater dangerous as her options disappeared. The first signal was my solar panels mysteriously malfunctioning on a Tuesday morning. I might awaken to lifeless batteries and errors, codes flashing at the inverter display. Whilst my electrician buddy Jake came out to investigate, he determined clear proof of tampering. Wire connections loosened simply enough to disrupt the device without causing obvious harm. Obvious harm. Marcus, this is expert-level sabotage, Jake said, photographing the proof with his telephone. Whoever did this knows electric structures. They desired to purpose troubles without leaving apparent fingerprints. But Jake turned into smarter than Karen gave him credit for. Frag. He'd mounted a hidden security digital camera near the electrical panel after the primary incident. 2 nights later, we stuck her purple exceeded, creeping round my assets at 3:10 a.m. with a screwdriver and twine cutters. The footage become crystal clear. Karen Cromwell, HOA president and upstanding community member, vandalizing private belongings under cowl of darkness. The acrid scent of her cigarette smoke lingered in the morning air, mixing with the pine fragrance that normally made me experience peaceful. Subsequent came my boat dock. I'd gone into city for groceries and returned to find my boat drifting halfway across the lake. The heavy-duty chains I might use to comfy it were cut with bolt cutters, smooth, planned cuts that left metal shavings scattered throughout the dock planks. That boat were Pop's pleasure and pleasure, a 1978 base boat that also ran like a dream. Locating it bumping against the alternative shore, its hull scratched from the rocks, felt like someone had desecrated his grave. But Karen's largest mistake became going after my septic device. I might simply hand it a county inspection with flying colors. However, suddenly my flawlessly functioning machine started backing up. The odor turned into awful. That aggregate of sewage and chemical components that made your eyes water from 50 ft away. When the emergency septic carrier arrived, the observed industrial-grade drain purifier had been poured down my machine, killing all of the useful microorganism and developing a poisonous mess. That is planned sabotage, the technician defined, preserving up soil samples that confirmed chemical infection. Ism pumped commercial-rate acids into your machine. This stuff prices serious cash and calls for specialized understanding to use. The repair bill become $3,200. But greater importantly, the chemical analysis supplied forensic evidence that this wasn't random vandalism. It turned into calculated destruction, requiring insider expertise of septic structures. Even as I used to be handling sewage backup, Karen became orchestrating her media blitz. Anonymous debts flooded social media with posts approximately my ongoing property violations and deteriorating situations, threatening community protection. The bots had been so apparent it turned into nearly comical. Dozens of profiles with conventional names posting same proceedings within minutes of every different. She'd additionally ramped up the intimidation network. Deputy Chad Cromwell's patrol presence multiplied dramatically. He'd cruise with the aid of my cabin 4 or 5 times consistent with day, usually slowing down just sufficient to make his surveillance apparent. Occasionally, he'd take a seat in my driveway for 20 mins, strolling license plates of each person who visited. The constructing inspector all of a sudden found code violations and paintings that had exceeded inspection just weeks earlier then. The hearth marshal acquired anonymous suggestions approximately hearth hazards that didn't exist. Environmental services got reports about unlawful dumping in areas of my property they had already cleared. It turned into death by using 1,000 cuts designed to exhaust my sources and wreck my spirit through bureaucratic warfare. However, I wasn't the only goal anymore. Karen had commenced going after my supporters too. Jake's electrical contracting license turned into under-evaluate for protection violations. Invoice Carter, the retired judge who'd been advising me, acquired a formal grievance with the Nation Bar affiliation about fallacious legal counsel to non-clients. The VFW Submit discovered themselves going through a Marvel hearth safety inspection that threatened to close down their weekly bingo nights. The ancient society turned into hit with zoning proceedings about their downtown workplace area. Karen was systematically attacking every person who'd proven me help, sending a clean message. Psychological strain turned into severe. Each morning brought new crises, new emergencies, new bureaucratic nightmares to navigate. The steel taste of steady pressure became as familiar as my morning coffee, but Karen's desperation turned into additionally creating opportunities. Each escalation began being documented through regulation enforcement. Every act of sabotage supplied extra crook evidence. Her network of supporters became beginning to distance themselves as her behavior became more and more unhinged. The legal professional widespread's office turned into watching everything, constructing an airtight case while Karen dug her hole deeper with every vengeful act. Me. Agent Torres referred to as a textbook criminal escalation. When perpetrators feel cornered, they often make increasingly more reckless decisions that provide prosecutors with the proof they need for conviction. Karen became strolling immediately into our trap, one sabotaged sun panel at a time. Karen's final play became so audacious it nearly labored. She'd figured out through her husband's political connections that I wasn't simply assembly with some random country professional. I used to be assembly with legal professional General Patricia Williamson herself. And instead of backing down, Karen decided to move nuclear. Her plan became wonderful in its twisted logic. She could function herself because the sufferer of a political conspiracy, claiming that the country's pinnacle prosecutor became targeting her circle of relatives for partisan motives. If she ought to file herself confronting government corruption at my cabin, she should turn the whole narrative and paint herself as a brave whistleblower status as much as abuse of power. The first signal of her new strategy came through social media. She'd reached out to authorities' Duty Watch, one of these blogger networks that amplifies memories about bureaucratic overreach. Her pitch turned into perfect. Small-town HOA president being persecuted via huge government due to the fact her husband worked for the opposing political birthday celebration. Local circle of relatives beneath assault. State officials use harassment research to silence political opposition. Changed into the headline that started out circulating 3 days before my scheduled assembly. The tale painted me as some type of deep state operative working with corrupt prosecutors to ruin an harmless family. The comment section changed into flooded with outrage from people who'd never heard of our lake community, however had been sincerely convinced that Karen became being railroaded via partisan prosecutors. Maria. She tapped into that vein of anti-authorities sentiment that runs through rural communities, turning herself into a martyr for political persecution. But Karen's grasped stroke became the stay movement setup. She'd organized to broadcast her war of words with the attorney standard live on social media, framing it as citizen journalism, exposing authorities' corruption in real time. Her plan changed into to burst into my cabin during the assembly, record the entirety, and let her fans spread the footage as evidence of reputable misconduct. What she did not understand was that we had been monitoring her communications. Agent Torres had obtained warrants for Karen's cell phone and social media accounts weeks in advance. We knew approximately the blogger outreach, the live move plan, even the talking points she'd organized for her spontaneous disagreement. It is actually perfect, Agent Torres defined during our final coordination assembly. She's going to devote multiple felonies on live video while imparting us with a real-time confession of her motives. We could not have scripted it better. The irony becomes scrumptious. Karen concept she changed into putting a lure for us. However, she was certainly on foot into the most very well-documented arrest in HOA records. Her aid community turned into crumbling too, but she became too obsessed to be aware. The opposite HOA board participants had quietly distanced themselves once the financial irregularities had become apparent. Her husband was dealing with his very own ethics research and couldn't provide political cowl anymore. Even Deputy Chad had been reassigned to one-of-a-kind patrol areas after Inner Affairs started asking questions about his response to vandalism reviews. However, Karen was past rational thinking at this factor. The psychological strain of preserving her fraud scheme hidden at the same time as combating off a couple of investigations had pushed her past. The breaking factor. She becomes showing all of the traditional signs of a person dropping manage. Paranoid approximately acquaintances spying on her, making an increasing number of threatening cell phone calls to anyone who'd supported me, convinced that everyone turned into a part of a few vast conspiracy against her. Boy, the nighttime before the lawyer populars go to, She made threatening calls to 4 one-of-a-kind families, warning them approximately results in the event that they continued participating with authorities' harassment. Each name changed into recorded with the aid of law enforcement. Each one provided extra evidence of witness intimidation and crook conspiracy. I spent that final night sitting on Pop's porch, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and pink. The sound of loons calling to every other across the water jogged my memory. Why this vicinity changed into well worth fighting for. The following day would determine whether or not I would be able to enjoy non-violent evenings like this for the relaxation of my retirement, or whether I would spend my golden years struggling with Karen's appeals from federal prison. The cabin felt special that night, now not simply due to the hidden cameras and recording gadget, but as it had come to be the middle of something an awful lot larger than my non-public belongings dispute. This became approximately whether small-time criminals with political connections should terrorize whole communities without outcomes. I pulled out Pop's worn leather-based Bible and studied the passage he'd underlined about David dealing with Goliath. He'd written in the margin, "From time to time, the little guy wins due to the fact he's combating for something bigger than himself." The morning would deliver Karen's very last determined gambit. She'd storm through that door questioning she'd become about to damage her enemies, by no means realizing she became about to destroy herself. The level became set. The cameras had been rolling. Law enforcement became in function. All we needed to do became wait for Karen to provide the grand finale to her personal crook career. The taste of anticipation blended with morning espresso had by no means been so candy. Instead of some intimidating political discern, she was this down-to-earth woman in her 50s who reminded me of my vintage excessive faculty primary. Hard but fair, with eyes that missed not anything. She'd arrived in my cabin at exactly 9:00 a.m., sporting a thermos of coffee and a briefcase complete of evidence that could alternate the entirety. "Mr. Henley?" she said, settling into Pop's antique recliner like she belonged there. "Your documentation has helped us build cases against HOA corruption jewelry in 6 counties. What you've got exposed here is not simply neighborhood fraud. It is a part of a statewide sample of organized robbery. We had been deep in dialogue about the criminal charges whilst we heard it." No, the specific roar of Karen's Escalade pulling into my driveway manner too speedy. Gravel spraying everywhere like she'd become conducting a few sort of high-paced chase. Automobile doorways slammed. A couple of voices shouting instructions, approximately camera angles and audio degrees. Karen had brought her complete social media production group for what she notioned would be her moment of triumph. "Here we cross." Agent Torres whispered into her earpiece from her hidden function at the back of my woodshed. Lawyer Trendy Williamson failed to even recoil. She simply lightly endured taking notes approximately the financial evidence at the same time as Karen's voice were given louder, working herself up into righteous fury for a stay circulation audience. This is it, parents. Karen's voice carried truly through my home windows. "We are about to expose the corruption that has been targeting our circle of relatives. The state's lawyer preferred is illegally assembly with our harasser, in all likelihood making plans greater government persecution." The sound of her fashion designer heels clicking aggressively across my timber porch changed into like a countdown timer to disaster for her catastrophe. Now not mine. Crash. The door exploded inward like she'd used a battering ram in preference to her foot. Timber splintered everywhere. The attorney Trendy's espresso mug hit the floor with a ceramic crash that punctuated the instant flawlessly. Karen stormed into my dwelling room, along with her phone held excessive live streaming everything, completely oblivious to the reality that she'd simply devoted crook trespass, breaking and entering, an attack in the front of the kingdom's leader, prosecutor. "I demand to understand why the legal professional well-known is secretly assembly with this guy," she screamed, waving her telephone around like it turned into a few type of weapon. "This is authorities harassment, political persecution. I've rights." The look on her face while lawyer Trendy Williamson flippantly stood up and displayed her reputable identity becomes simply priceless. Karen's stay flow captured the precise second while her mind processed what had simply came about. Total frozen terror. Mrs. Harrer, Mrs. Cromwell, the legal professional popular stated in that calm, professional tone that possibly made hardened criminals wet themselves. I am Patricia Williamson, legal professional fashionable of this nation. You have got simply dedicated a couple of felonies in my presence, and your entire crook overall performance is being recorded via each my workplace and your personal social media broadcast. Karen's phone turned into still, stay streaming. Her fans had been watching in actual time as their heroic whistleblower turned into a babbling, incoherent mess. The comments section exploded with confusion and disbelief as humans realized they'd been supporting a crook who'd just self-destructed on camera. I've jurisdiction here, Karen stammered, nonetheless come what may, wondering her HOA's badge gave her authority over country prosecutors. This is when FBI agent Torres stepped through my nonetheless open doorway, flanked by using two different federal retailers. Mrs. Cromwell, you are beneath arrest for fraud, extortion, witness intimidation, and criminal harassment. And thanks to your stay stream, leave your confession broadcast to approximately 30 witnesses. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed via my cabin, just like the final of a ebook. Karen's phone clattered to the ground, still streaming her arrest to an audience that had shriveled from outraged supporters to horrified voyeurs watching a public meltdown. Karen, I stated, standing up from Pop's sofa with a glad smile. Meet the country's attorney, Trendy. She's been trying to speak about your bookkeeping methods. The acquaintances who'd been drawn by means of the commotion stood on my porch looking in greatly surprised silence because the woman who terrorized our network for months turned in to study her Miranda rights in my living room. Mrs. Patterson, who'd driven down from her daughter's region specifically for this second, had tears streaming down her face. Sheriff Rodriguez arrived simply in time for the perp stroll. Karen, stumbling in handcuffs past the equal dock she'd tried to have demolished, beyond the equal sun panels she'd claimed to have been hazardous, beyond the equal cabin she'd called an eyesore. The pearl-white Escalade with its Rule 1 conceitedness plates was towed away as evidence in the fraud case. The live flow ended with Karen's voice echoing throughout the lake. This isn't over. Watching Karen get sentenced 3 months later felt like Christmas morning. Federal Choose Michael Harrison didn't simply throw the ebook at her. He released the complete law library. 3 years in federal jail, $340,000 in restitution to defrauded homeowners, and an entire life ban from serving on any HOA board within the USA. Her husband, Robert, wasn't a long way behind. The ethics investigation discovered he'd been the usage of his function as Democratic birthday party treasurer to offer insider information about zoning changes and development plans. He resigned in disgrace and were given 18 months for conspiracy and abuse of office. The HOA itself was dissolved faster than sugar and warm espresso. In its vicinity, we formed the Clearwater Lake Volunteer Affiliation, emphasis on volunteer. No obligatory prices, no citation authority, no electricity under the influence of alcohol presidents, simply acquaintances operating together to hold our little slice of paradise beautiful. My position in exposing the corruption scheme earned me something I by no means predicted. Whistleblower reimbursement from the recovered fraud funds. Seems while you help the feds get better hundreds of thousands in stolen cash, they are pretty beneficent with the rewards. That test for $45.0 felt like vindication for each sleepless nighttime Karen had prompted me. But the actual victory changed into watching justice ripple outward. Legal professional General Williamson used our case as the inspiration for brand new nation legislation that I nevertheless cannot trust has my name on it. The Henley Act calls for all HOA to undergo annual independent financial audits and creates criminal consequences for harassment-based totally belongings manipulation schemes. 3 different counties used our proof to prosecute comparable fraud rings. Seems Karen's operation became part of a miles larger network of politically related criminals systematically robbing owners across rural groups. The FBI very last file diagnosed over 24 associated cases spanning 5 states. The families who'd been pushed from their homes began coming back too. Mrs. Patterson moved lower back from Florida and threw a block celebration that lasted till dawn. Property values didn't just recover, they soared. Turns out, whilst you cast off the constant danger of harassment and fraudulent citations, people really need to live in a peaceful lakefront community. Who would have notion? The transformation went past criminal victories. Our little lake have become a model for sustainable network living. My off-grid cabin, once Karen's target for eyes' sore citations, now hosts monthly excursions for people interested by solar electricity and environmental stewardship. The Country Environmental Organization featured us of their renewable electricity showcase application. I mounted the Pop Legacy Scholarship, the usage of a part of my whistleblower repayment. $500 offers for kids coming into trade college programs. Pop always believed that operating along with your arms become the foundation of a sincere life. Seemed to be coming to assist the subsequent era analyze those identical values. The yearly Clearwater Lake Festival has become a regional appeal, elevating cash for veterans housing help programs. Remaining we added insufficient to fund 3 tiny home tasks for homeless vets. The candy smell of barbecue and the sound of families laughing collectively changed the toxic surroundings Karen had created. However, the quality component, the quiet moments. Sitting on Pop's porch right now, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson. The loons are calling to every different across the water, their voices echoing off the equal hills where Pop taught me to fish 60 years in the past. My solar panels hum peacefully at the roof, powering a life. This is subsequently my personal again. No more licensed letters, no extra inspection visits, no more fashion designer heels clicking across my dock at sunrise. Simply the mild lap of waves against weathered timber and the information that from time to time, in case you're cussed sufficient and righteous enough, David certainly can beat Goliath. The documentary crew from Netflix finished filming right here final month. HOA, how one guy took down a crook empire premieres next spring. They paid me sufficient to add a guest cabin wherein other harassment victims can stay whilst preventing their personal battles. Due to the fact Karen wasn't precise. There are electricity. Inebriated HOA dictators in communities across the United States terrorizing elderly owners and stealing from community price range. However, now there's a roadmap for fighting back. Now I need to listen from you. Drop a remark sharing your very own HOA nightmare. Believe me, you're not by myself on this combat. These memories want to be instructed. Subscribe if you want greater memories about normal people taking down corrupt systems due to the fact there may be loads more in which this came from. So, next week, I am telling you about the city councilman who attempted to close down a veterans meals truck until the proprietor's Pentagon friends determined to pay a visit. Thanks for placing out with us on HOA Stories, in which the HOA Karens meet their match. If this tale had you cheering or cringing, cross beforehand and like the video, drop a remark along with your reaction, and hit subscribe so you're prepared for the next wild HOA tale.